on, guys? Trevor Hansen back again with the Wake channel. Appreciate you guys tuning into all the content. Today we're going to talk about something that I get asked all the time, especially by beginners. How do I set my boots up on my board, which is what we would call picking your stance. There's a couple different things that you need to look at, but a lot of it's personal preference, but we're going to kind of go through the steps of what to do and what not to do and show you how to pick your stance. So one of the first things that you want to determine when you're setting up your stance is actually how wide you're going to set the boots up on the board. There's a couple different screw holes for wider or narrower. I would recommend starting just outside shoulder width in a comfortable squat stance is probably where you're going to want to be. A little bit too wide and it puts pressure on your hips, a little bit too narrow and it puts pressure on your knees. So right there in the middle, comfortable squat stance is the best place to start. So after you determine the width, the next thing is the angle of your feet, or how ducked your feet are going to be. And it's kind of the same rule of thumb. You're just going to kind of just be barely ducked for most people. Some people might find that being a little bit more ducked is comfortable. Some people might think that a little bit straighter is more comfortable. That one's kind of a personal preference, and it has to do with what's comfortable to you when you actually get into that squat position. But getting into a squat position and actually going down into some depth is a really good way to figure out how wide and at what angle your feet want to sit at. Once you figure out how wide you're going to be and at what angle you want your feet to be, the next step is actually setting the boots up on the board and finding the correct mounting hole so that you can get that stance that you want. One thing that's really important to consider is you have to play a little bit with the boot to make sure that you have the same distance on your toe side and on your heel side. You don't want to be set up too much on your toes or too much on your heels. So when you set that boot up on top of your board, play with your angle, but pay attention to the distance on your toes and on your heels so that you're creating the same distance. The same thing is true for the nose and the tail of the board. Make sure that when you set up that you're picking the same mounting screws on your board on both sides. So don't set up all the way out on one side and then one in on one side so that you have more tip or tail. You want it to be equal. So if you pick the middle mounting holes, set up both of your boots on those middle mounting holes. So now that you went through all the steps of finding the correct spot for your boots, the next step is just to go ahead and mount them to the board. The one thing that you want to make sure, especially if you're crossing brands, if you're using a different brand binding for a different brand board, just make sure that the screw size is correct for the insert that you're screwing it into. So if you're changing brands, read the manufacturer's labels to find out what kind of inserts they have versus what kind of screw you're using, and just make sure that you're not threading the wrong screw into the wrong insert so you don't do any damage to your product. Stance is a pretty easy thing to figure out, whatever's comfortable to you. There's a lot of different opinions on narrower, wider, that kind of stuff, but it's definitely something that there's some guidelines. The stuff that I told you is pretty much will get you close, but go ahead and play around with it, especially if you're just starting out. If you want to try to go one hole wider or one hole narrower or vice versa with the angles, play around with it, find that perfect stance, get comfortable, and just have fun out there.